This episode includes brief description of suicidal ideation, infertility, and child loss. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Relationscapes. I'm Blair Hodges. We're mapping out the stories and ideas that shape who we are and how we connect with each other. Our guide in this episode is Frederick Joseph.
I realized that I did not have language as a writer for most of the things that were inside of me. This chaos of directions I had been pointed in to go that I didn't even know if I wanted to go in, and what we define as a black man in society, right? What we define as being masculine in society, what we define as just simply being a man in society.
Frederick Joseph grew up without a father, and he's wondering if he wants to be one. As a kid, he loved Broadway musicals, but some people thought he'd be better suited for sports. And today, as a writer, he tries to resist the suffocating expectations placed on him as a black man in America, making room for the full range of human emotions. Sorrow, laughter, anger, pain, love, and joy. And his message is resonating. He's made the New York Times bestseller list twice. His latest book is a collection of poems called We Alive, Beloved. Frederick Joseph joins us now to talk about the intersections of race and masculinity in America. Frederick Joseph, welcome to Relationscapes.
Thank you for having me. How are you today?
I'm really excited today. I'm excited to talk about how your work explores the intersections of gender and race in America, specifically for you, blackness and masculinity.
Yeah. I mean, so much of that is at the root of my work, whether it's in poetry, nonfiction, or even forthcoming novels. I think it's important for us to unpack our intersections that we live at, and, you know, how best to do that and demonstrate it than doing it myself.
Do you find that... Do you ever wish you could kind of do other types of stuff? The reason I asked this question is because I remember something from James Baldwin where he said, imagine all the incredible things that we could write if we didn't have to try to address America's deep racism and reckon with all this stuff. Does that ring a bell to you, or is this kind of your wheelhouse anyway?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting. I started my career writing primarily nonfiction, The Black Friend, Patriarchy, et cetera, because I wanted to kind of get it out the way, hey, and just in case something happens to me tomorrow, you know, there's some things here to kind of help leave the world a better place. But, you know, in the future, my goal is to always tackle the things, but I think even in my novels that are coming out in the coming years, I give myself the opportunity to play with other aspects of my interests, right? Whether that's, you know, my comedic bone or even bringing up things in my work like anime and things of that nature. But I do think that it's, you know, I guess even as I'm thinking about it, even those books, I'm tackling, you know, the Vietnam War and stuff. So
yeah, man.
Yeah, we are constantly still doing the thing. So it does get tiring. But I feel like I was called to the work. So I try not to think about it too much.
I also think about the fact that everybody is engaging from their place of identity. And so white authors, for example, might not feel the weight of writing as a white author, but even their work is shot through with all the background of white supremacy or their own perspectives. So I think when it comes to more racially conscious authors, and especially black authors, it's more out on the table because of the nature of racism. So for white authors and other folks, it might seem like it's not there, and they can maybe even feel like they're writing from a raceless place, but they're not. Nobody is.
Right, no one is. That's an excellent point.
All right, well, let's set the table with a reading from your new collection of poems here. The book is called We Alive, Beloved, and the poem I thought we'd start with is called Session 3, To Eulogize a Man.
Absolutely. Session 3, To Eulogize a Man. Rage once carved its home in the chambers of a man. Boyhood pillars, barbed and tangled, became a cruel foundation. I navigated the fortress of this binary, my heart under rusted lock. My tears untold, myths in the hollow of my eyes. Can you see the tyrant's sword I carried? Masculine rigidness engraved, bloomed from roots, rotting in ancient deceit. But the Reaper's ledger bore my name in the way of a reckoning, cast naked into the underbelly of moonlight. Beneath the shroud of the world's oldest mother, I died. And then I became a man, not by the measure of years, but by the weight of the choices fossilized within my marrow. A cemetery of selves, quiet within, unmarked graves housing faces I once wore, buried in the alcoves of memory. Rabid ghosts gnawed at the peace of those who loved me. Shall we gather tonight in the ghost light, so you might help me write the eulogy for the people I once was? No roses, no tears, just the quiet ritual of acknowledging the truth and letting it rest in the land of yesterday. I nurture new seeds watered with accountability wrung from my past selves.
That's beautiful, Fred. And the reason I wanted to start here is because you're talking about past selves and how we all carry these past selves with us, or we're haunted by them like ghosts. They're part of us. And you talk about boyhood pillars at the very beginning, which became a kind of cruel foundation. I wanted to hear, outside of poetry, how you would talk about those pillars. What are they? What are those boyhood pillars that you were building on?
Yeah, so I think when we think of boyhood, especially in the context of Western society, it's typically seen through the lens of stoicism, violence, aggression, accomplishment, right? And I think that in a capitalistic society, when those things all meet, you're in for trouble, right? The
Yeah.
intersection of all those things meeting is a lot of trouble. I would also add a void of emotion is one
Mhm.
of the pillars, or at least emotion that's lends itself to anything other than anger.
Yeah.
And so, when I talk about these pillars, all the things I just named, it creates, or rather you lay a home that is yourself, your body, your mind, your spirit, your soul on these things, and they are rotting, right?
Mm.
While the home might stay up,
Hmm.
what is falling through, what is falling apart, what is damaged, right? It's like you're not actually, you might be standing up, but you're not a whole self.
It reminded me of an essay in Patriarchy Blues, your previous book, where there were some neighborhood kids that stole some of your Pokemon cards, or maybe all of them. They stole your Pokemon cards, and your
Mm-hmm.
mom told you to go get them back.
Mm-hmm.
And you were kind of a kid, didn't want to get in trouble, didn't want to get in fights. This is not the kid you were, but maybe in the name of survival and a mother's fear for her child, to say, I don't want you to come home till you get those back, which in your case probably meant engaging in some kind of boyhood violence.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in that story, my mom worked really hard to get me, Pokemon cards. This is when Pokemon was all the rage. I think it is again now, if I'm not
It's
mistaken.
back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Everything comes back at some point. You learn with age. But we were poor. There's no other way of putting that.
Yeah.
We lived in poverty. And so to have something such as Pokemon cards was a huge thing. My mother worked extra hours and took other shifts so that she could make that happen. And when these kids stole my cards, I just didn't know what to do. And so I had asked them for them multiple times, and they refused to give them back to me. And so I eventually went home, and my mother asked, "Oh, where are your cards?" I had like a little book that I had the cards in to
Hmm.
proudly display and show people when I was walking
Yeah.
around. And my mother essentially told me, "You have to go find a way to get those cards. Don't come home until you have the cards," because she was trying to teach me a lesson in not only it wasn't just a lesson in ownership, really. I think some people took that story that way. It was a lesson in being a black kid in America,
Yeah.
right? Just the way in which that part of me would have to harden for respect that would help me survive. And I went back outside and I kept on begging for the cards, and eventually I just became enraged, right, at the
Yeah.
idea that someone would not only take my property, but would put me in a position where I was essentially putting my mother in a position where her act of love and kindness was almost worthless, right?
Mm.
It meant nothing to them. It meant everything to me. And so eventually I got the cards back by wailing on the kids.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
grabbed a really big like stick branch thing, and just started wailing on these kids, and not only took my cards back, but took other kids' cards as well that they had taken, and gave the cards back to other kids in the neighborhood who had lost their cards to these kids. And I think that's the difficulty about the intersection of violence, because it's a language that sadly some people only understand in our society, right? And so that's a difficult one to navigate. How do you communicate with people when they've been taught generationally only one language?
Yeah, and you talk about in Patriarchy Blues, you say that after you just punched the crap out of this kid, you're looking at your bloody knuckles, you're looking at these kids, and you say that something died in you in that moment. And that
Yeah.
took me to this eulogy where you're talking about the death of something in you, and that your mother was engaging in what a lot of people call the talk. This is something a lot of white people probably aren't as familiar with. These are discussions with kids about racism in America and about who they need to be. And I think the more common way of thinking about the talk is that you need to be careful around police. You need to be unassuming in stores. You need to walk around without your hands in your pockets. Don't wear a hoodie at night. Like these kind of things. But there's this other side of this hardness, this like survival thing of like, you need to learn how to fight, because if you don't, then you're going to get wrecked as well. So that's another element of that talk that, again, I think it's something I hadn't ever really heard about till I started engaging with this kind of literature.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the films that will put certain, or one of the docuseries that will put certain things into perspective, I think, for your listeners, is Exterminate All the Brutes by Raoul Peck.
Hmm.
It just kind of talks about colonization from, from the early instances of the Dutch colonizing what is now the United States, to more recent instances of just the propensity for violence in this country and in other countries against primarily, people of color. And the reason I bring that up is because for people like my mother, whose mother's grandfather, her great grandfather, was lynched in the South, this conversation about survival is not just a survival of police. It's not just a survival of the education system or the housing system,
Mm-hmm.
or all the systems designed and crafted by white supremacy. It's the survival of everything, because so much has been influenced by those systems, right? So you're talking about,
Scarcity.
right, how do you survive in a neighborhood where white supremacy has had such a stranglehold even on black minds? How do you
Mm-hmm.
survive, you know, as an author one day, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a industry that is extremely supremacist laden? How do you survive when you're leaving the house, when you're watching television? So my mother was trying to instill in me a hardness
Mm-hmm.
just so she wouldn't lose her son.
Yeah. And that hardness you talk about as a death in your poetry is something's dying in you. You became more violent. You were more prone to have fights or to be ready to fight. And we get to see that throughout your work. Let's turn to an earlier poem here. This is called Learning to Speak. This is earlier in the book on page 12.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll have you read that one to connect up with where we're going here.
Sure. Session 1, Learning to Speak. I was an adult when I began the difficult labor of speech. In the gray light of a stranger's office grew a wasteland of words, catacombs of hidden hurts, of joys too fragile to share, stubborn in my throat, voice trembling like a newborn's cry. Each syllable, an act of creation, each silence, a statement of intent. Where should we start? Well, I'm Black in a time where just being Black isn't marginalized enough, disabled, but not enough for most to care, fatherless, but I don't tell people to avoid tropes, motherless, when it matters, even when everyone says, she's still your mom, depressed, but who isn't these days, so I never bring it up, engulfed by trauma, not knowing whether I'm a good husband, riddled with anxiety, wondering what being a good father looks like, questioning myself about the extent of my writing talent, if I have any. Oh, and the potential of being poor again constantly over my head, like a cartoon anvil that falls out of nowhere. How about we start at the beginning? Between my teeth, the syllables shivered, nestled like unlit candles. But he could see my stories were a refuge, uprooted and lost, seeking sanctuary. Silence stirred like tea leaves, eyes with notes of a brewing storm. Before lips can know language, the heart must know truth. How strange it feels to bloom so late, after wearing disguises, to camouflage in crowds and in myself. But to speak at all is to be right on time. At least that's what my therapist said. As my tongue stumbled over the debris of dread, relinquishing the paper fortress of loss, I sculpted sentences out of my sorrow. With each word, an island is born, rising from an ocean of unbroken self, fortified under the therapist's gaze. Each nod of understanding becomes grains of sand gathered until there is land enough to inhabit a continent of voice.
Thank you. So this one is session 1. We started with session 3, then we went back in time. You're sitting with a therapist, and they always say, like, where should we start? And then your mind just wanders about all the different things. And this is the idea of intersectionality here, right? All of your different identities and how they're tied up in an idea of masculinity.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because I'm actually in the process of doing a consultation this week for another therapist, as a matter of fact. But, you know, for me, that first session that I ever had with a therapist was one of the most important sessions ever. And this poem kind of combines a few sessions, just because the first session was actually before I was married, but you get the point.
Yeah.
But I realized that I did not have language as a writer for most of the things that were inside of me, right? Just this chaos of tropes, this chaos of, directions I had been pointed in to go that I didn't even know if I wanted to go in, and all these things rooted in what we define as a Black man in society, right? What we define as being masculine in society, what we define as just simply being a man in society. And so, this poem was just like, what did it feel like to first start considering language for those things?
There's actually a term for that. There's a clinical term. I don't remember how to pronounce it, but it's in another episode where men especially often lack the actual vocabulary for different emotions. They literally can't say what it is. And this comes up again and again in different episodes. There's an episode on intimate partner violence where a man whose daughter was killed by her spouse can't even really talk about it because the words just aren't there. And like you said, like, you're a writer, that's your craft. Like, this is your skill. And you found yourself confronting that deficit, and in therapy, like, learning, you had to learn new language here.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing with, I think, therapy. I think that's the point to it, is it's finding language, even if that language is like not verbal, if the language is just in the body, right? Just
Yeah.
like how you talk to yourself, how you move throughout the world, throughout anything. And so it's so important. I think that a society where men begin finding the language is a society on the precipice of finally being decent.
Mm. And speaking of intersections too, you talked about disabilities. We can talk about sexuality too. You're a heterosexual guy, but you also have to reckon with homophobia in your life, right? So I'm thinking, for example, of a letter that you wrote to a drama teacher that's found here in Patriarchy Blues. And this musical theater teacher, he seemed to sense you had this innate love of musical theater, like you loved it, but you soon came to pick up on maybe that wasn't okay for a guy.
Yeah, yes. Stephen Zowell, may he rest in peace, was for a long time my favorite educator. He was a drama teacher, and he was someone, I mean, whatever a person thinks of a drama teacher, like, think the 90s, like, and I mean, like, drama with the capital D, like drama,
Yeah.
and I went to a performing arts elementary school. And so you could take anything you wanted. You could be in band, you could be in drama, you can be in dance, so on and so forth. And so I was originally in band, and I was joking around, I believe, and like singing something. I can't remember what it was. And he was putting on a musical, and he heard me singing this thing in the hallway. And he said, "Hey, could you sing this?" And he gave me a few lines in the hallway. I'm all of like 9 or 10 years old. And it was from the show Oklahoma. So he does it. He's like, "Can you do that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And I do that. He's like, "How'd that feel?" And I'm like, "Good." He's like, "Okay, we're gonna get you out of band and get you right into drama, you know?" So
Yeah.
and while in there, I just loved it. I absolutely loved it. And because we were putting on the first show I was in was West Side Story, I got to not only act, but dance and sing. And I just, to this day, it's probably my first love. And somewhere along the lines or along the way, I don't remember when it was, but I just remember somebody saying something to the effect of, "That's what gay people do."
Yeah.
Right. And I didn't even know what that meant, really. I'm at that point, maybe I'm 12 or 13. I didn't really, at 13, I think, but
Yeah,
maybe
same.
12, I was like, yeah, I'm just like, I don't really know. And so I just started having this feeling like I shouldn't be doing this. Right. And
Hmm.
as I was having this feeling that I shouldn't be doing this, the things that I should be doing, especially as a young Black kid, why aren't you playing basketball?
Hmm.
Why aren't you throwing a football?
Yeah.
Why aren't you watching football? Who's your favorite player? Who's the center? People are like, "Oh, who's your favorite athlete?" I'm like, "Andrew Lloyd Webber." you know, Steven Sondheim. I don't know. I'm not into that. And so eventually, when I started coming to terms with certain things meant and what it meant for how people identified me, again, and also people have to bear in mind, I'm also, besides just being a boy, I'm a Black boy in poverty, just trying to find my way. I said, okay, I guess I'm supposed to step away from these things so I can be a real boy and become a real man,
Yeah, and this teacher did so much for you, but you also talk about the complications here because he's such a positive figure, but he also is the one who introduced you to the musical The King and I, which you discovered was like
Yeah.
severely racist. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Gosh, yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the things I've also struggled with. So we did The King and I, and as a kid, preteen, whatever, I had no issue with it. And then as I got older and began to unpack some of the things that we were, some of the things we're doing, even recently, I actually thought about him again because he was a staunch Zionist. And I didn't really think about that until, more recently and what that actually meant, especially the intersection of thinking about him and The King and I and the racism of The King and I, and then, his sense of, kind of like a kind of colonial mindset in terms of like settling lands and things like that.
Yeah.
And so,
Really quick,
that's
like the king's basically like the white, he needs to be tamed. He's the white, like,
yes,
and then
yes,
the
yes,
white
yes.
people come on in and like fix it all, basically. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So for those who have not seen The King and I, basically you have this country, Siam, I believe it is, where you have, it's just absolutely disgusting. Was essentially supposed to be these brutish, ignorant, brown people,
Yeah.
who need the English to come in and help them become refined and dignified and more Western. And in large part, that is the job of, and I forget her character's
Yeah.
name now, but the main woman in the show, where she's meant to basically teach the King of Siam's children how to be proper, good Western children, right? How to speak
Yeah.
eloquently and things like that from a Western problematic sense and a white sense.
It's the odd
Um,
couple with more racism.
Yes, yes. He has, there's so much to it. It's actually also a very patriarchal show.
Yeah.
There's a lot
Yeah.
to that. And so, after the fact, when I'm unpacking what it meant to play these roles, right, as a man, and I'm unpacking the roles that I was in love with as a kid, I
Yeah.
had to also unpack who Steven Zell was, right? And
Hmm.
for all his wonderful, amazing tendencies and also his flaws. I mean, he was also a very demanding educator, to the point where he wanted Broadway perfection from 12-year-olds and 11-year-olds and 10-year-olds. And so
Yeah.
he would yell at us in a way like where I would cry weekly,
Yeah.
right? If I missed a note, right? And he would say verbatim, he would curse to the point where parents would have to come in and actually complain about him. I loved him so much. I just never brought it out to my mother, but he would say things like, "Are you stupid? That's not the note. And you're 12."
Wow. Wow.
You
Yeah.
know? And so, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
beautiful to see you wrestle with this because you don't just unequivocally condemn this man. Like it seems like you're really wrestling with the dissonance of the fact that like people can be important in your life and also be really problematic.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that everybody? Right? Like it is like
Yeah.
one I think that the beautifully sad and honest thing about coming to terms with yourself and the people around you is that you find out that in our own ways, we're all a bit broken, all a bit dark, and maybe all a bit of someone's villain in their story, right? At some point or another, because we're all trying to figure this thing out and the systems are much older than we are. And so, when I think about Mr. Zowell, or when I think about some other educators I've had, coaches I've had, my mother, my grandmother, right? Like people constantly say I speak the world of my grandmother. My grandmother was my everything. My grandmother was also an alcoholic, but my grandmother was an alcoholic in large part because I can't even imagine
Mm-hmm.
being a black woman raised in the Carolinas
Yeah.
in the 30s and during Jim Crow and having a father who was lynched.
Yeah.
Like, so
Exactly.
of course, so I could be mad about your alcoholism, or I could look at, the root cause of you needing an outlet. And there's just so many things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if we all had a little bit more space to consider, we would not be so hurt.
That's Frederick Joseph, and we're talking about his book, We Alive Beloved, a new book of poems. And he also wrote the book Patriarchy Blues, Reflections on Manhood. He's received a ton of awards, including the International Literacy Association's 2021 Children's and Young Adults Book Award. He was a 2019 Forbes 30 Under 30 list maker and was also included in the Roots Top 100 Most Influential African Americans. All right, Fred, let's talk a little bit about your father. I'm going to have you read a poem about him called My Father's Void.
Okay. My father's void. The ink had not dried on my birth certificate when my father's form became vacant. Casualties of Reagan's war on blackness, a cradle left to be rocked by echoes of sirens and fleeing footsteps. Gone not as a thief, stealthy and kind, rather as smoke dissipates, abandoning the fire. But with his ghost, he left me an inheritance, not a void, rather a container, a black hole. On the other side is me, pulling in fragments of cosmos from every soul who leans in close, pouring into me parts of themselves as hugs, kisses, laughter, shoulders to cry on. In the black hole my father left, the vast expanse of that darkened space, stars were born from every tear I had shed. I learned the dance of resilience, feet bare on the shards of what he could not give. I arose, clear and rare, whole.
Hmm. You say that you don't look like your dad,
No.
but you do carry his name. I
Yeah.
don't remember if you've ever even met him.
Um, no, well, one, I look just like my mother, but with a beard. And two, I have met my father once. It's a really sad story actually. And I
Hmm.
was maybe 6 or 7, and I was at a mall with my grandmother, and there was a man staring at me, and I was always taught, like stranger danger. I mean, if you
Yeah,
see,
yeah.
and if you see this, and I'm a kid, born in the '80s, raised in the '90s.
Yeah.
Stranger danger hashtag.
Yeah, there's
Um,
white vans without windows around every corner in the 80s.
right, exactly. And so what happened was, someone was staring at me, and I told my grandmother this man is staring at me, and she looked at him, and she's like, he's staring at you because he's your father, and he's not saying anything because he's a coward.
Wow.
And then she just like pulled me away.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. Did you ever talk about that moment with her again after that?
I don't think so. I don't think I talked about it
Wow.
with her or with my mother. I was one of those kids who is acutely aware of like other people's pain
Yeah.
and like difficulties, right? Like the type of kid who knew we were poor, so I would turn the lights off knowing I wanted to like help with the Con Ed bill or the electric bill or whatever.
Yeah.
So I just wasn't going to create any more drama, any more trauma, things like that.
You even say about him as you're trying to like think about why he became who he became. This kind of connects to what we were saying with your drama teachers. You're thinking about whatever pain and trauma seemed to entitle him to cause others pain and trauma. And here's a quote from one of the essays in Patriarchal Blues I wanted to read. It says, "The thing about life is that every new day you have is an opportunity to be someone different, someone better. I can't judge the boy who made mistakes, the boy being your father, as I've made a lifetime of them myself. And I expect to make many more, but I do judge the man who refuses to atone for what his younger self has done."
Yeah.
So there's both accountability and trying to like have your heart feel what he's feeling.
Yeah, and I feel like that's everything, right? That's life.
Yeah.
We can hold space for many things to be true at once, and I think that sadly our society just doesn't.
Hmm.
For me, I'm a black man now who works with black boys, black teens, and so on and so forth, and I can see so much. And I can't really imagine. I mean, like my when my mother became pregnant, the two of them were 18, right?
Yeah. They're kids.
Yeah, your children. And so on that hand, and your children growing up in the Reagan era, right? Where, and in Yonkers, New York, which was one of the last
Yeah.
places systematically desegregated in the country, actually.
Mm,
And so I can't imagine. But then on the other hand, I am collateral damage from all of that, right? And so I have to hold
right.
space for both truths, like your pain and your struggle, but also my pain and my struggle.
Well, I want to connect that to your own thoughts about being a father. I also just want to add as a footnote, there's a great little poem before the one we're about to read called Cereal Time Machine, where you talk about eating a bowl of cereal every week to help you stay alive. I still eat bad cereal, like quote bad, like sugar cereals is still kind of what I do. So just wanted to shout that out real quick.
I
Like,
love that. I'm happy. It's so funny when you're curating a collection of poetry. It's almost like an art gallery to a certain extent. And there's
mhm.
some poems in it that I feel like there's like some things that are very highbrow. There's some things that I don't think are lowbrow at all, but I think that they are like for specific people. And I'm happy that someone could relate to that because I actually think it's a very powerful sentiment. This idea of like, freezing time and still being young and a kid and
Yeah.
enjoying the things that have kept you alive in that way.
Yeah, I love that you put it right next door to the poem I'm about to have you read called Legacy
Mhm.
Born in Ash. So, with that in mind, that you still kind of revisit that, use that time machine to get back to those probably Saturday morning cartoons and eating that terrible cereal. Let's have you read Legacy Born in Ash.
Legacy born in ash. I have watched rivers turn skeletal beneath an atomic sun, seen forests laid low and undone in the throes of merciless wildfires set by no one and everyone. I've choked on smoke-blackened skies, bruising cerulean until they're gray, palms smeared in the grit of a home in peril. Still, each night, I rock the dream of an unborn child and wake with the excitement of an unfinished poem. Then, in a voice weighted by day's gravity, I ask the mirror, could I invite a little one into this? A world unraveling like old wool in indifferent hands? Maybe it's vanity, trying to exorcise the ghosts left by a father I never knew, mother whom I haven't seen in years. Am I wrong for wanting to christen a child with a name drawn from the wellspring of our ancestors? Gift them laughter from my favorite movies, pass down the colors of teens I cherish, show up for them in places I felt alone. Could I bear the weight of a child's trust broken, knowing there was a way to protect them from it all? As I yearn to press my own life into another, I know evergreen love cannot be an everlasting shield. For Black children still living as both miracle and target.
So those considerations, it's not just about the ongoing troubles in the world, a pandemic and climate change, but also the state of racism in America and everything that constitutes. And these are just some of the thoughts, let alone all your personal thoughts about, like, could I be a good dad? Could I stand to see a kid's heart break, even if it's something I didn't do? All these questions that you're reckoning with to become a parent. Where are you at in this journey?
Oh, that is an excellent question. Gosh, I it depends on the day. Today is one of those
Yeah.
days where I think, especially transparently with everything that's happened in Gaza, I'm not feeling good about parenthood,
Yeah.
just and for anyone who is a parent who will listen to this, praise be upon you. It's rough. I have trouble being a dog parent right now, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'll be walking my dog in my neighborhood and there's just like litter all over. And I live in a pretty nice New York City neighborhood, and it's just
Yeah.
litter and trash, and it's hotter this year than it's ever been already. And it's like,
Yeah.
I'm just, the things, all the things. And so I'm struggling. Blair, I am struggling deeply.
Hmm. And you almost have had kids. There's a beautiful poem where you talk about the loss of a child, where you're talking about you and your partner. It's called "We Cry Together," and maybe tell folks a little bit about that poem and how that connects to this, because you're still struggling with the idea of becoming a parent. You almost were at one point.
Yeah, and I think that the world for me looked different at that time. So that was
Mm,
now 2 years ago. My wife became pregnant, and this is after, trying for quite some time. And, she has struggled with infertility. And so, we went the route of IVF,
hmm
and, it stuck at first. And then we find out one day on a random day, that was supposed to be just a routine check-in, that there is no longer a viable pregnancy. And so I wrote about that as probably one of the most detrimental and painful moments of my entire life.
mm,
Not even just the period of time, but rather like the precise moment and the look on her face when she found out, because I've never seen pain and disappointment like that in my entire life.
mm.
And again, I struggle now, even because, my wife still wants to have children and be a mother. And I feel like she has a way, whether it's a superpower or not, I'm not sure, of disassociating a little bit with society at times, just so she can like carve out spaces for her happiness.
Yeah.
And I don't really have that. I think our careers are also different. A
Hmm.
lot of my career is, being 10 toes down, neck deep in the pool of these things. And so, yeah, that's the thing right now, is kind of like this internal battle because of the external factors.
There are moments in this piece that I think anybody who's has experienced IVF or experienced this kind of loss that will deeply resonate with them. There's a gift in that some writers have to put into words the unspeakable. Maybe we could read this one. This one,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
really
for
beautiful. This is
sure.
on page 42.
Sure. We cry together. Her shriek is raw, snapping all the world's quiet, as dreams, unborn, tumble into the abyss of almost. I don't know this sound, an anguish that pierces my soul. With what little strength I have, I grab her hand, weaving through the grooves of her sorrow, though my grip is frail. The geography of her face is foreign to me. As the doctor explains the terrain of a pain I cannot mend, a black hole I cannot save her from. Nah, this can't be right. Look again. Refusing to accept my wife's body as the site of such an inexplicable vanishing. A promise left lingering in the world of daydreams. She asked me and the doctor to leave the room, needing a moment to plead with the universe. From the hallway, I hear her sobbing, an ocean devouring her smile. My knuckles meet the steel door of a sterile hospital room, attempting to punch away our misfortune until I can replace it with something she actually deserves. For all of the IVF shots, the nights we debated over names, the anxiety attacks about money, and the moments we pinched ourselves at the idea of being chosen by Frederick Joseph. How do you stitch a wound living in the syllables of a name never called? There is nothing to say when spun into a vortex of unspeakable loss. We spend weeks huddled around grief like a campfire, telling silent ghost stories about the people we stopped being just days before. Nurturing a flame so small it could be mistaken for hope. In the most somber hours, when the world took its deepest breath, I sat beside her, staring at the slight crescent of her unhoused belly. For so long, I swore I heard a heartbeat, but it was actually planets collapsing in the cavities of my chest. And I wondered, how are we going to survive this? And in time, my question was answered. Together.
That's Frederick Joseph reading from his new book, We Alive, Beloved. He's been a New York Times bestselling author twice, once for The Black Friend and another for Patriarchy Blues. When you wrote this, did you bring it to her first? What did you do with this piece?
Yeah. Whenever I have something that, kind of intimately discusses her or anybody else for that matter, I try to let them read it first, give their green light, thoughts, so on and so forth. And the piece was written shortly after we found out, but I don't think I had her read it for like another year and a half or something like that.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you had to keep it. When you
Yeah.
think about a poem like that, I mean, it's so intimate, it's so personal, and it can mean so much to people. So the fact of making it public matters so much. But I wondered about if you ever kind of wrestle with that, about like, this is a sacred thing you experienced, and what's it like to kind of decide whether you're going to make something like that part of your public work?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think that's part of the work is helping other people feel seen, right? I think I think I tell people all the time, I think I'm a good writer. I think if there's anything that makes me a great writer or a writer worth remembering is that I've given you the things that I have so you could feel less alone,
Mm-hmm.
right? Baldwin was phenomenal. Didion Morrison, I don't know that I am or will ever be at any of those levels, but what I do know is that I gave what I had and that people will walk away from it feeling less alone because I've demonstrated that we are all facing such similar things.
And the next question I ask, not to find out specifics, but are there pieces that you have decided like, no, actually this one's for me?
Um, mm, there are pieces, at least in this collection, there are pieces that I actually didn't decide that they were for me, but I decided that they needed to be out in the world sooner. And so so there's a few pieces on my social media that I wrote while in edits of this. So like a lot of pieces, about current events, right? You look at,
Mm-hmm.
children who have been taken so heinously in Gaza and whatnot. And so I have pieces ready for this collection. I'm just like, I want people right now, not in something they have to pay for, but right now you can just come to my page
Mm.
and share to feel like you're in community with someone.
Mm.
Right. And so I think those are the only times that I've ever, used something or held something back from being, so it's still public. It's just not in the collection.
Yeah, that's interesting. The difference between like where you're putting work even
Yeah.
matters. Like just the thought process of like, okay, am I going to hold this one back, put it in a collection? Am I going to just put it out right now?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's been extremely important for me. Because I think another thing is that the collection also has pieces in it that wouldn't work on like a social media platform, right? Because
Yeah.
there are things in this collection that you have to actually not just sit with because of what I'm saying, but I reference events even. Like as an example, if you don't know who Tyree Nichols is, right? You have to go Google who
Hmm.
Tyree Nichols is. If you don't know who George Stinney is, and you have to go Google George Stinney and what happened to George Stinney. There's a poem in the collection called The Odyssey, which I think is a 5-part poem, 5 or
Yeah.
6 part,
Yeah.
and that's not a social media. That is something that you have to like legitimately. I have had to go back and sit with it, and
Yeah.
like okay, okay, like
Yeah.
yeah.
So wait, so when you're writing, is it kind of like you're not laboring over every word? Like, what's the actual process like then? And maybe it differs according to poem, but are you just kind of letting your mind go, or are you sort of like really trying to get the lyric and like workshopping every word to see how it sounds? Like, what's your process?
I write like a songwriter, I suppose. So I already have like a tune in my head, what I
Hmm.
want people doing to it, whether, if it's like, I want you smiling, I want you, fawning over someone, I want you, whatever. And so I just kind of like go with what the feeling is, right? So if I want you
Yeah.
angry, right? Like I have a poem that I believe is in this as well, but it was originally actually on social media where I'm talking about gun violence,
Hmm.
and it's a very brief poem, and I'm just it's guns don't weep for us, and I wrote it originally after the absolute heinous moment in Uvalde, and hearing about all those children. Oh God.
Mm.
And it's just I'm angry, right?
Hmm.
And so I have in my head, it's almost like Rage Against the Machine or something
Hmm.
in my brain,
Yeah.
and I'm just like the NRA, and this is your fault, and
Hmm.
so I just go from there, and then I'll go back to it and edit later with a clearer mind. But I just kind of like am in the studio, if you would,
Mm.
when I'm writing, and then I come back after and I kind of do what you do, really, right? Like,
Yeah, you got to cut it. You got to like
yeah,
piece it together, right? Like you
yeah.
mentioned the Odyssey too. That this is a beautiful piece that reflects on suicide. And as you mentioned at the beginning of this piece, suicide is the third leading cause of death for black men aged 15 to 24 in the United States, and the number's not going down. So, in your own life, like as you're creating art from this, are you thinking about your own experiences with thinking about that? Like, how personal does this piece get for you?
Yeah, I think for me, I I've struggled with so much. I've not thankfully struggled with wanting to die by suicide, but I've been in places where I wish I could disappear,
Hmm.
if that makes any
Hmm.
sense. And I do think that
Yeah.
there's a differentiation between the two. I think that, dying by suicide is wanting to legitimately take yourself from this world and cease to exist. And I think I've wanted to exist just elsewhere, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah.
And so I've struggled so deeply with that at points where I'm just like in tears very often, just like wake up in tears and go to bed in tears. And you have those days when you were looking at this world, right? Not just as a black person, but just as a human being, just
Hmm.
like on a day where, you see a father in another part of the world find his child under rubble, with no way to identify them other than the thing that they were wearing last.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I know
it's
exactly what you're talking about, and it's, I
yeah,
mean, yeah, I'm,
it's
yeah.
hard not to go to sleep drenched in tears that night, right? And so I've struggled with that, right? I've struggled understanding with when to disappear, and so I can it makes sense to me someone who wants to die by suicide, and so I just think it's such an important topic to tackle, especially in a collection title, We Alive Beloved, because I think that the idea of being alive is so multifaceted,
Hmm.
but that also plays an idea of being beloved. Like I do think all my readers, for me, are beloved beings who I am just so happy to be on this journey with.
You talk a lot, actually, about the thought process that goes into a lot of your pieces. And, with the suicide piece, I mean, you're talking about violence. Again, you're talking about violence directed toward the self. Then you talked about the Uvalde piece, the piece about gun violence, about violence directed towards others. You talked about violence you struggled with as you learned to fight as a mechanism of survival and masculinity, and learning to put that behind you. And in Patriarchy Blues, there's a moment where, there's a lot of moments where you say, hey, here's a quote. "It took me a long time to figure out how I wanted to frame this entry, and more important, what I have to offer the conversation." So when you're writing a public piece like this, it's not poetry. When you're doing more of your essay type work, what audiences are you thinking about? Like, what are the calculations? And the reason I ask is because talking about, for example, your dad leaving you could easily be picked up by people who have tropes about black dads, right? So even talking about it can be kind of used in really problematic ways. So like when you're thinking about talking about this tough stuff, like what are you thinking when it comes to audience and how you're going to frame stuff? What are you doing?
God, that's such a great question. I think for me, that is, especially because my for those who don't know, my background, and you and I were talking about this before, my background is in comms originally, right?
Yeah.
I got my MBA in marketing. And so I'm constantly thinking about audiences
Yeah.
and segmentation and things like that. And
It's kind of a
I
blessing and
have,
a curse, man.
yeah, truly. And I have to just at times throw it by the wayside because I can't be beholden to everyone else's ignorance,
Hmm.
right? I have to be authentic and truthful. But I also think that that's why I constantly reimagine existence, right? I push back against tropes by just writing a myriad of things. So in the one, yes, if you have a black trope about fatherhood, I've also told you that I want to be a father, right? And
Yeah.
I know fathers. If you have a trope about violence, and you could feel as if I'm leaning into that, but I also have a piece in that same collection or in that same book about being tender with other black men, right? And so
Yeah.
I'm constantly pushing against, and then even in, like I said, I mentioned earlier, forthcoming novels, my novels are probably the most tender I've ever been in my writing.
Hmm.
And so, because you get to really imagine in fiction, right? And recreate.
Well, you can get into psychological states of your characters too in ways that I think
Right.
you can't really do that in essays. Like I could write an essay. I mean, you get there a little bit. Like you're talking about your dad and you're kind of imagining maybe things that he went through, and you're sort of like you're exercising your empathy there. But you can't tell a truth about your dad in the same way that you could if you're controlling the whole story as as you're writing a piece of fiction.
Exactly. No, that's exactly it. Because I think that, inside inside baseball. So my debut novel comes out next May. It's entitled This Thing of Ours, and it centers this kid whose father passed away. And he's has a difficult relationship with his mother, a great relationship with his grandmother. And so it somewhat plays on certain things that I'm pulling from my own life a little bit. But like as an example, I didn't want his father to abandon him.
Hmm.
His father actually, in the little instances that we get of, hearing about him and who he was extremely loving and caring, and he didn't die from gun violence. He didn't die from violence in any way. In fact, he actually died from like systemic violence in a very nuanced way against like black bodies in medicine and
Hmm.
in like expectations of black bodies, right?
Hmm.
And so I get to, again, to your point, take what I've written, take my experiences, take the things I see, and imagine more, imagine different, and also imagine the things that are actually also real, that are just not my experience. I have plenty of friends who are black dads and had black dads and will continue to be black dads, as an example.
Yeah, and this is where like fiction can be truer than you can be truer in some ways in
Yep.
fiction than you can be in writing your essays. And I love it's so obvious that you have this communications background. Like you're always thinking about like there's the levels, right? There's the message you're conveying. There's the messenger and everything that you're bringing along with it. Then there's the messages package, like what you're doing, and there's the audience that it's packaged for, and there's
Yep.
multiple audiences. And sometimes it could be something as simple as like a bad Airbnb experience, like on Twitter, then becomes like a. Did you know? Yeah. Let's spend a second on that. Like,
Yeah.
that's such an interesting piece where you're talking about something that happened, just a bad Airbnb experience, becomes a moment for you to like reflect in a written essay.
Yeah. Uh, it's one of the reasons why, God, the internet is such a gift and curse. So I, during 2020,
Wait,
went
on
to,
that, do you think we'd be better if the internet straight up just never existed or not? Like, I have
oh
this debate with my
gosh,
wife.
Blair,
Like, what do you think,
I
dude?
just posted something about that in a story that like, I'm struggling with that more so every single
Me
day
too. I go
because
back and forth.
without the internet, you and I wouldn't be here right now having this
No,
conversation. And
exactly.
yet, for all the good that has been done by the internet, I do think I could argue that more harm has been caused.
Yeah, I
Just
think like
like,
COVID denialism is just one example among many. Like, how many millions of people got sucked into that wouldn't have otherwise?
right.
But then there's also like marginalized people that can meet up, that can find each other
Hmm.
that way too.
Yeah, I mean, like anything in life, you got to look at the plus minus, and
But
and
you're
I
saying the
think that,
ledger might come down on like maybe it's a
I,
little worse.
yeah, I think so. Gosh, the one way I look at it, like using very specifically social media as opposed to like the broader internet. Or actually, we use the broader internet. There's a documentary, guy. We could probably talk for the next 15 hours, but
Yeah.
there's a documentary talking about. It's on Netflix. It's about a myriad of things, but they talk about Pizzagate
Uh huh.
and just like QAnon and all
QAnon.
these.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you've seen it probably.
Yeah.
I forget what it's called. And I had to ask myself. So I've done wonderful things thanks to the internet. How many of those sort of things, QAnon, Pizzagate,
Yeah.
the Airbnb thing I'll go into in a split second, have happened versus like the positive story
Yeah.
about like, Blair Hodges who just saved a kitten from a fire thanks to somebody tweeting about it and, him
Yeah.
saying, "Oh, that's across the street. I can save this kitten." How many
Yeah.
instances do we have of that? To the point, right? Using Airbnb. So make a long story short, and this is gonna play right into it, right?
Yep.
So I think it's important to note that I actually came into public kind of like
Notoriety.
conscious, if you would, or whatever, because I had first took kids to see Black Panther for free, and I started like the largest GoFundMe in history with the Black Panther Challenge, right? So,
Yeah.
so I had been
Yes.
given this like.
Internet.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. There's a point for the internet, right? So that is the one point I will give the internet that I was able to do that thanks to the internet, right? Fast forward years later, so I was obviously had degrees in writing, so on and so forth. I'm a writer. Da 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 da. The first things I don't know how much time we have because the Airbnb thing actually started not with Airbnb, but it started with Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah,
Um,
dude. I have as much time as you do. So
okay, so I'll explain that really quick. I was a national surrogate for the Warren campaign, and when you're a national surrogate, they find people for you to go speak to in
yeah.
various parts of the country, and people they think that you will resonate both with. I am Black and grew up in the Baptist church when I was a kid. So they're like, hey, you're going to go to churches. I'm also
Hmm.
a 6'2" guy who loves sports and all these stereotypical things that people assume are talked about in barbershops. So, hey, can you go to churches and barbershops throughout the South and talk about those before him?
They didn't send you to
Sure.
Broadway though.
Right. Right. Exactly. I would have been better served outside of a showing of Phantom of the Opera, to be honest with you. But, but they send me to churches. They send me to barbershops. And I'm also, mind you, I have also in New York a barber, and I've been
Yeah.
going to the same barber. My barber actually recently passed away.
Mm.
Rest in peace,
I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah.
Lenny. Yeah, yeah. And I have been going to him for 15 years.
Mm.
So in the same way that like someone can be familiar with my work, in passing or online or in my books, my barber I see on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to the barbershop as soon as I get off this conversation with
Nice.
you. So my barber knows me. He like, and
Yeah.
I am a very political being, like socially conscious being. And so we talk about these things. So that's important for what I'm about to say. So going to barbershops, and I had been a victim of stop and frisk during the Bloomberg administration
Mhm.
in New York City. Elizabeth Warren found this out, and her and I used to actually, meet on a pretty decent basis on the campaign trail. So one time I'm in South Carolina, and she's about to be on the debate stage, I think, in a few days, and she's talking to me about my experience with stop and frisk. She's so taken aback by this that she asked them to record a video with me.
Hmm.
So I record a video about stop and frisk, and she gets on stage later that night and demolishes former Mayor Bloomberg over stop and frisk. Just absolutely obliterates him. My barber,
I remember
who is
this.
right, my
Yeah.
barber is just funny how this is behind the veil. My
Wow.
barber, who is really locked in to the election in the primary because his main client, who was his first client at his new barbershop, me, and has been going to him for 15 years, and he watched me come into public prominence, if you would,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I'm all in. And so I come to the barbershop the next day. He had watched the night before with a few other barbers because I told them that this might happen because I had a video out about it, blah, blah, blah. So I come in and he's like, oh man, like, actually he said something to the effect of like, your girl really killed Bloomberg last night or something like
Yeah.
that, right? Like, man, we all saw something. So I tweet about this in just the moment. I go to a wedding a few days later. And as I'm at the wedding, my phone is just, I'm like, what's all these notifications
You're
about?
blowing up.
Like, what's happening? So I finally stepped out from the reception. I checked my phone, and these supporters of other campaigns and these like low-level grifters on the internet who make up conspiracy theories have said, oh, this guy's lying. This is not how they speak in barbershops. Like, he's lying. This never happened. Like, they're just like things that never happened. So really what you're talking about is you're assuming that black and brown folks don't talk about politics.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also very specifically, even if I didn't have my personal existence, we just talk about these things. What do you think? We just, like, whatever. It's extremely racist is what it is, right? And it also just erases the identity that I have as a national surrogate who has social media. My barber can see me on social media talking about these things, whatever, fine. So then that turns into my own Pizzagate. It turns into Barbershop Gate. Literally, you can Google this. Google barbershop gate, Google like Fred Joseph barbershop, and people started saying this never happened, and they started conflating the barbershops that I was visiting with the barbershop that I attend on a regular basis and saying this never happened at a barbershop you just randomly went to in the South. Elizabeth Warren's campaign is making barbershops and just making up stories, and they are inventing barbershop. Like literally they're staging barbershops because they're like, oh, look at this picture that he took in this barbershop. This is not a real barbershop. What barbershop would have this on the wall and that and this and third? And became that like the campaign's line to the point where the press secretary had to put something out about like, we're not lying about barbershops,
this
whatever.
Is a real barbershop.
Right. And so you fast forward.
Carefully too though, right? Because you don't want people going to the barbershop. Like
precisely. Because we already know that like pizza shops were literally like a pizza shop, like someone with a gun. People, So you fast forward to the story I talk about in Patriarchy Blues about this Airbnb. So basically a few months later, during 2020, this is after Warren had dropped and I'm, whatever. Yeah. This is just a few days, I believe, after the news about George Floyd had surfaced, right? And so I need to get out of the city. I need to clear my mind. We've also been protesting and all the things, right? Yep. I need to clear my mind. So I take my wife, my younger cousin, and my little brother, who at the time is maybe 7 or 8. And I take them to an Airbnb about 2 hours out of the city. We're driving to the Airbnb. There's Trump flags everywhere, so on and so forth, American flags. For people who don't understand, that is very triggering and traumatizing for people who are, I would imagine, just not white supremacists. So we get to the Airbnb, and usually I'll go in and check to make sure everything's fine. And as I'm walking around the Airbnb, there are all these like, and I posted this. I posted the images, the literal images. It's not like I'm just like, there's like statues, for example, of like a dog having like anal sex with a woman.
Yeah.
And there's like a taxidermied bird under one of the beds. And there's a carving of like some type of symbol for magic or something under one of the beds. And there's like Baphomets in all of the room. And there's all these different things. And so I'm just like
occult stuff that you didn't see in the listing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So I call Airbnb. I'm like, hey, I'm not staying here, especially because like I'm in this white area. And a lot of that, I grew up correlating some of that to white supremacy in different instances. Yeah. Now, was that correct? No, but sure. But this is what America has done. But
sure. And you feel it in your body. Like you feel that, like you went there to get a break. This is not a break.
Exactly. So I call Airbnb. I'm not staying here. And they're like, well, the Airbnb host says that it's just art and they'll come remove the art. I'm like, no, this is not just art. Under the bed where my little brother's supposed to stay, there is a taxidermied fowl and a statue of a dog anally raping a woman. I am not staying here. I don't feel safe. So they're like, well, there's nothing we can do about it. We're sorry. So they don't know that I have like a Twitter following, like a social media presence. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to post about it. So I post, I'm like, a thread, at the time, and this is whatever. And I'm just like, oh, like Airbnb refuses to refund me for this like satanic Airbnb.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So
do you wish you never did it now because of what you're about to describe? Like, do you wish you're like,
yeah.
oh shoot,
Oh,
okay,
100,
all right,
100%. I mean, I would just take the L on like the $3,000 or whatever it was.
All right.
So I post that. Now, mind you, a reason I gave this story about the barbershop gig is because already on social media, there is this like idea that I am a liar. I went from being like someone who like treats kids well to being a liar. But not only am I a liar, I have a book coming out, like my first book, The Black Friend, on being a white person was debuting a few months later. So they're like, he's trying to drum up sales.
It's the PR machine, yeah.
Right, exactly. And so
he also has a communications background. It's brilliant.
Right. He knows what he's doing, And so I post about it. But mind you, I also post the images. I'm posting.
I went back and found it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And I'm like, I am Black. And I am with my little brother, and also, mind you, George Floyd was just murdered in Brown and Taylor and so on and so forth. So like, there's a lot in my body at this time. Yeah. Right.
And it really was the makings of like a horror movie. This is like Jordan Peele's next like picture.
Right. Exactly. And so what ends up happening is a decent amount of people were just like, okay, this is messed up. Airbnb refunds me, but then the entire like internet, it felt like, descended upon me. Right? Like, you are trying to bring back a satanic panic. The Church
Which
of
is
Satan
real, by the way. Like,
yes. A satanic panic is real. Satanic panic is real. Yeah. But I think when I said earlier in our conversation, we have to be able to hold space for more than one thing being true. Right? So like, I am not trying to bring back a satanic panic. Also, there's occult imagery, and I am Black in America, meaning I probably grew up Christian, which is also because of white supremacy, but sure, nonetheless. And I'm with a 7-year-old Black kid, and there's so many things at play here. And I'm also like, not like to throw this around lightly, but I'm also like a public figure, right? Like, and so like, there have been instances I've gotten death threats. So like, it wouldn't surprise me if somebody tried to lure me to an Airbnb and like drain me of my life, right? And whatever, that wouldn't surprise me. There's more, worse things have happened, more surprising things have happened. So anyway, the whole internet descends upon me. People are just like, you're a liar. This never happened. I'm like, the images are right there. I'm not trying. It becomes this
before you could AI thing. Those images too, by the way. Like now we got another level of BS to deal with.
Exactly. So it becomes this entire thing to the point where like, I just stopped using social media for a while. And it was really bad. I started getting death threats. The internet just like turned on me. I will never fully understand that moment because it seems so in part rooted in white supremacy, right? The ways in which people refused, even during like the quote unquote awakening, racial awakening, people refused to see
may the awakening rest in peace, by the way.
Right, exactly. People refuse to see like, okay, who are we like tarring and feathering here, right? Like, this is a Black man who speaks out often about racism, gets death threats, and just all these things that are at play. And, so.
There was like a think piece published. Was it in like Slate or where somebody, or BuzzFeed or something? Like somebody even
so that was, yes, I forgot about that part. So it was not Slate. It was
BuzzFeed or
no. It was what's it called with a V? Not with a V. Vice. Yes, Vice.
Yeah, Vice.
It was in Vice. This piece comes out from this woman who's like, who just like so she like says that I like sent my like hordes of followers on this guy. At the time I had maybe 80,000 followers or something. On this person who owned the Airbnb. And I'm like, no, I didn't. I just literally never even posted where it was or who the person was. No. I just wanted my money back, right? Yeah. And what you have now done as a white woman who I've come to find out, the white woman is into all of this same kind of like iconography and things like that. And even more, she's friends with the person who owns the Airbnb.
Oh, I didn't know that part.
Yes, she's friends with the person who owns the Airbnb.
Wow.
Yes.
And it's total like, if there was white splain, like we've got mansplain, this was definitely like a white splain piece here.
And so I'm like, wait, so are you not going to like are you going to ignore that? Like, yes, I have 80,000 followers. Don't mention this person at all, but you have now taken your millions of monthly and daily readers and sent them my way as
Yeah.
like the black man bringing back satanic panic and like trying to undermine this like thing that you as a white woman and this white guy are really into. So now all these white people who are like probably living in like, some, hippie area of whatever part of the country are like attacking me now. That's great.
Well, and then underneath all that, you got Airbnb, which is collecting money. So there's like
Right.
layers on layers here. Like the easiest thing would have been like, this didn't work out. Let's get some refund going. But you
Right.
know,
It's just, yeah. So, Twitter hates me.
so when you say that, yeah, maybe the internet net negative for humanity, for listeners out there, need to weigh the direct experiences you've had with being the victim of internet hordes and the swarming that can happen when you become the character of the day or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a society that's like been taught anti-intellectualism and a lacking of critical thinking, both woefully needed on social media, but non-existent in most instances. Yeah, it's a net negative for me. So
All right. That's Frederick Joseph. He comes down on the side of net negative for the internet. He's also the author of The Black Friend and Patriarchy Blues. Today, we're talking mostly about his book, We Alive Beloved. It's a new book of poetry. All right, Frederick, I wanted to wrap it up with some hope here, right? We've talked about some of your struggles with masculinity, what it means, intersections with violence, with sexuality, with fatherhood, with being a son, with being estranged from a mother, and all of these things. But you aren't completely without hope here. Like you seem to be a person that is still, despite any of these circumstances, striving for a new masculinity. So let's read this piece on page 8 about that. It's called Him, tender. So him, tender.
him tender is laughter until our abs hurt, the reclamation of humanity. Should we find out? This way, brother. Between the lines of their definition for masculine, where we chuckle like children until our cheeks hurt, build each other up until our hands are calloused, voices rasp from being honest about our wounds. In the wisdom of our tears, we remember old language, vulnerably stitching together a bridge to healing. Or, if you need, we can just sit here and be silent.
So where are you finding it today? Like, what do you recommend people do when they're looking for this healthier a masculinity that is trying to reckon and get rid of this baggage?
I say you have to be thoughtful about curating space with people, right? I think even this conversation with you, realistically, even what we were just talking about with the Airbnb thing, I haven't laughed about that
Yeah,
like publicly ever. Right. This is the first time I've actually laughed about it because I'm so
cool.
removed from it now.
Yeah,
And I thank you for that because I do think that you've created a space between two men for healing and growth and just being alive. And so I've tried to do the same in my individual life, right? Where I've put myself around men and put men around me who are interested in all the things, right?
mm-hmm.
Just how we laugh together, how we cry together, how we listen, how we speak, what words we use, intent, what it looks like to be more. How are we holding each other up when we're less, it makes me think of a book from my dear friend Joel Leone. It's entitled Everything and Nothing at Once, from Holt Macmillan. And it's a collection of essays that's just about his black manhood and holding space for his difficult relationship with mental health, with
Mm-hmm.
being a father of two, with, what it looks like to have grown up and be taught that like you're nothing, but then have people counter that, you know, consciously throughout your life, thankfully. And so, all that to say, I think that I'm just so grateful to be able to lean into masculinity that finds itself on an equal playing field within the same body as what we define as femininity,
Mm-hmm.
and let the two things swirl around each other and dance and intersect and just create something that's more liberated and free than what many of us have known in the past.
And like you said, we're going to find it in actual relationships with people, and we're going to find it in the stories that we can tell. And I think you as a writer are one of the skilled people who can speak for so many people and give us words that we didn't have before and give us words that we had but couldn't put together. And so I want to just say thanks for your writing. I've learned a ton. There's so much in these books that we could never begin to cover in the scope of an hour and 10 minutes or whatever. So thanks for doing the work you do. And I can't wait to read more from you.
I deeply appreciated it. It means the absolute world. And I'm hoping to be back.
Yeah, man.
I'm hoping to be back. And I have some people who I would love myself to hear you in conversation with. So we'll talk about that offline.
Good. Well, we have one segment at the end here that you can choose what to speak to. It's called Regrets, Challenges, and Surprises. So is there anything you would change about, let's make it specifically about We Alive Beloved, right? Because it's coming out right now. And even though it's just now coming out, there might be something that you would change about it. It's like, it's kind of out of the gate by now. So, right? So regrets, what the hardest part about it was, or what surprised you most?
I would say a regret. Gosh. So as I said earlier, there's certain poems that I put on social media and don't put in the collection. But I think that there's a few poems about the current political and social moment that we're in that I should have put in this collection, solely because I think that a book will outlast social media. And so if I never get to write another collection again, I do wish that those poems were in this. But
is it primarily stuff about Gaza, like more stuff about Gaza?
Yes.
If a piece has been tweeted, is an editor less likely to say they want it in the book then? Or is it just like you feel like, okay, I've sort of published it, so I don't want to put it in there?
Sometimes I think with this collection, it's interesting. I went with a super indie house, Row House Publishing, because they primarily publish Black and brown authors, especially those who are marginalized with disabilities and things of that nature, or marginalized in their other identities.
So that can help elevate the press then, like New York Times bestselling author coming to that
right.
press.
That's exactly one of the reasons why I went with them. So I just, being really honest, I can't go with, a house of without having certain resources for like some of my, like a novel or something like that. But for poetry collection, especially this is their actual first book of poetry that they're publishing. My goal was to help increase the stature and launch, their poetry division. And so, they were a really good partner about, I'm like, hey, I posted this on Instagram 25 minutes ago, but I want it in the book. They're like, okay, Fred, that's fine. Save some stuff for the collection though.
Yeah, nice. Okay, cool. Well, all right. Any surprises or challenges?
Surprises, challenges, surprises, how difficult it is to sell poetry. And that's also the challenge. I think we just do a horrible job right now in our education system on the broad importance of literature and writing in general, and teaching people how to read, not just like be able to like read a sentence, but like actually like sit with, because that's the necessity of poetry is it demands that you sit in it, right? Even if it's just a stanza.
You have to slow down.
Right. And so I feel like helping people reimagine their own reading has been a challenge, and then getting them to actually buy to books has been a surprise how difficult that is, because I have had great success with that in the past.
On that note, I just want to recommend again, We Alive Beloved. It's a book of poems from Frederick Joseph. It's terrific. I haven't read a lot of poetry. I want to read more. Your book made me want to read more, which I think is a mark of the best kind of poetry, is like, man, I need to read more poetry.
I appreciate that. That means more than you could ever imagine. That's thank you.
We'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us, Frederick. This has been a terrific conversation.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for this episode of Relationscapes. I'm Blair Hodges. Thanks for being here. I have a little update. Since we recorded this interview, Frederick actually deleted Twitter altogether, so you won't find him there. But you can check him out on Instagram, or check out his Substack and other work at frederickjoseph.com. If something in our discussion today resonated with you, I hope you'll pass it along. You can also rate and review the show in Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or send me a message that might appear in a future episode. You can DM me or email me, blair@firesidepod.org. Mates of State provided our theme song. Relationscapes is part of the Dialogue Podcast Network. I'm Blair Hodges, and I'll see you next time.